assuming that there were debt write-downs and student debt, all these housing debts, these sorts of things were wiped out, how would we prevent this from occurring again? What should the fire sector look like going
forward? Well, this is exactly what Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, Ricardo, Marx, Alfred Marshall, the entire 19th century British political economy, classical economics, was all about that very question. That's why it's not taught. That's why there's no more history of economic thought in the economics curriculum, because they discussed it and they pretty much solved the problem. They said, what we have to do to prevent this and to enable industrial capitalism to grow is get rid of the remnants of feudalism. The parasites to Adam Smith and the French physiocrats before him and the British socialists who followed were the landlords, who somehow, as John Stuart Mill said, a landlord, this is the hereditary heirs of the warlords who were sponsored by the Catholic Church to conquer England, inherited the land and charged rent. And Mill said, they make rent in their sleep. Well, the common policy supported by all classical economics, and in fact was also the first plank of the Communist Manifesto, was a land tax, that the value of the price of land has rises and rises as communities become more prosperous, as the rent of location goes up, as living in a good neighborhood with schools, museums, and parks rises, the price, what people are willing to pay in rent rises. But you don't want this paid to a landlord class because they just use it to buy more land. This should be the natural tax base, and that was people now associate that name with Henry George, who was a journalist in America that promoted it, but it was the basis of all classical economics that was based on value and price theory. And the distinction between value and price was price is the excess of value that represented economic rent. Value was the cost of production. But land doesn't have a cost of production. Nature produces land. The owner will have a privilege of charging rent on it, but this rent, because it's not productive, it's unearned income, this rent is a natural tax base. And as late as 1913, in the United States, at the end of the year, when they introduced the income tax law at the beginning of World War I, soon thereafter, only 1% of the American population had to file an income tax return because the cutoff didn't begin until you were rich enough to be either a wealthy landlord or a banker. Finance, insurance, and real estate income were basically the only forms of income that were taxed. And under classical economics basically said, well, we don't want a landlord class. We don't want a predatory banking class that just doesn't make money to help the economy grows, but just is exploitative. So banks should be a public utility, land should be a public utility, and housing should be a human right, and insurance should basically be public, and monopolies should not be privatized. Because if you have a monopoly, and usually banks will insist that governments pay their debt by creating a monopoly to sell off. That's how England created the East and West India Company, the South Sea Bubble in France, John Law's Mississippi Bubble. And the Bank of England was a bank monopoly created to sell off 1.2 million pounds sterling to retire Britain's war debt. The idea is classical economics was economies should be based on value, not rent. You get rid of the rentier classes. You get rid of the landlord class, the monopolist class, and the financial class. And that was where everybody called themselves socialists in one way or another in the last quarter of the 19th century. You had Christian socialism, Marxist socialism, you even had libertarian socialism. You'd have utopian socialism, scientific socialism. I mean, you could look, just Google and find all the different kinds. But the common denominator of all of them was you tax economic rent. And if the economic rent of increasing location is paid as taxes, then it's not available to be paid to the banks. Well, right now, America and Europe no longer have a hereditary landlord class. What they do have is a hereditary financial class. The landlords ended up becoming bankers and financiers. They sold the land, and now anybody can buy land. You don't have to have an ancestor who killed the local population to take it over. You can buy your own home and land, but you have to borrow the money in order to afford to do it. So the banking sector today, the banks are in the same position that landlords were in the mid-19th century. And so the ideal, you asked, what's the solution? The ideal would be Adam Smith's idea of a free market, a market free from economic rent, a market free from landlords, a market free from monopolies, a market free from a predatory banking sector. Well, now that you have today's economic curriculum that has expurgated this whole discussion of classical economic philosophy, they've redefined what a free market is. A market free from government regulation, a market free from government anti-monopoly regulation, a market free from taxing the land so that the economic rental value will be paid to the banking class that's lending you money to bid up the price of land. And the bankers are playing the same parasitic role that the landlords played in the 19th century. And if you read Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill, Principles of Political Economy, and some of their applications to social philosophy, you realize how Marx was simply in the train of the classical economics. And he sort of refined classical economic analysis. And that's what volumes 2 and 3 of Capital were all about. Rent theory and debt theory. Financial theory is basically debt theory. And that's why the fight against Marxism isn't really against Marx alone. It's against Adam Smith. It's against John Stuart Mill. It's against the whole 19th century classical economic reform of scientific economics itself.